Another thing you don't want to hear is there's our 1 minute. You never want to hear the guarantee. Nothing in law is guaranteed. Nothing.
Oh, right. If they're if they promise you something other than I will work as hard as I can and do the very best of my ability, if they promise you anything other than that, run screaming, run.
Yeah. I guarantee you're going to win this motion. I guarantee that no, you have no idea.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing.
Hey everybody, Doug Passon, coming to you from Scottsdale, Arizona in Studio 3553, helping us get set for sentencing today, a very special guest, Bilal Khan. Now, Mr. Khan is, full disclosure, former client of mine, and he's coming to us from a federal institution. He's currently incarcerated, but what's really special, well, there are a lot of things special about Mr. Khan, but what is the most special is that while he was incarcerated, he authored a fabulous book, and that's what we're going to be here talking about on Set for Sentencing today. The name of the book is Surviving Pretrial, the Ultimate Survival Guide to Being Busted and Prosecuted by the Feds. It's really, I wouldn't say dense is the right word, but very detailed. It's a big book. It's close to 500 pages, and it is just filled with amazing, useful information that really is, I think, you tell me in a minute when I let you talk, but I think it's for clients to help, and their loved ones probably, to kind of help them navigate this really, really complicated, scary, unfair process. And it also helps them, arms them with knowledge so that they can be better advocates for themselves and communicate with their lawyers about what they want and what they need in a case. And so I love this book. I'm so amazed at the work that Mr. Khan is doing, despite the circumstances, his perseverance to move forward and contribute in this way, in a very meaningful, significant way. So I'm so happy to have you on Set for Sentencing. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm good. It's a little hot in Phoenix, but I guess
that's 25 straight days over 110 or something, right? You know.
I guess it would be really like dickish of me to complain about the weather, given that.
Oh no, don't worry. Everybody up here complains about the weather. Everybody up here complains about the heat at like 90 and 45% humidity. So don't worry.
So this is one of the bullshit things. There's so much bullshit about being in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and I've been very blunt about that on this podcast. But one of the big bullshit things is, we didn't want to do this as an attorney-client privilege phone call because technically this probably isn't an attorney-client issue and whatever. No one wants to get sideways with the man. But
this call is from a federal prison.
Oh yeah, there it is. What great timing!
The reminder.
So if you're talking on a line with an inmate, someone's always listening. So that's wonderful. But also, 15 minutes we're going to get cut off, and so Mr. Khan and I are going to do this in increments, and we're going to sort of inch through some of the big highlights, and then I'm going to cobble this together, and we'll have a podcast episode. But let's just start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Give me the backstory. How does this book come to fruition?
Well, I sat in pretrial for 5.5 years and went through, I think, 7 lawyers. In the end, I had some great lawyers, one of them being you.
That was the other full disclosure. Did I mention that?
Yes,
yeah,
you did. You mentioned
good.
that I was a client.
Okay.
It's although I always joked with you that you're not really a lawyer because you were nice to talk to and you weren't full of shit. So
thank you. Well, thank
you. But while I was sitting in pretrial, it just dawned on me that there was no information available for the defendant to know what was going on. And as I'm going through my first arraignment, and I'm getting taken to court, and I have no idea what's happening. Nobody told me what was happening, and I was just so lost. And to me, that's what gives the government so much power over you, is that you have no idea. And when you have no idea, you don't know that you're gonna, it's gonna be another 3 years before you see a sentencing judge. Beyond that, so that lack of knowledge, and my parents and my brother and sister, they constantly were looking for books, and at the time there was only one book available, Busted by the Feds. While very good, concentrated so much on the guidelines that it left out all of the other minutia of the federal system, and didn't touch too much on how much time it's going to take, and every type of hearing that you're going to have to do, and what does a judge want to hear at sentencing? Those kind of things aren't discussed, and it seems like a lot of attorneys, especially ones who specialize in criminal defense, are so bombarded with so many cases, especially public defenders, that they just don't have the time to sit there for the 150 hours it would take to learn all of this stuff that you can all read in a book now.
Well, let me just put a fine point on that, because that's true. There's no way a lawyer is going to have time to teach a client everything that they need to know about this complicated system. But that said, what I'm hearing you say, sadly, is that your lawyers and many of us are complicit in keeping you in the dark and making you so lost, because we are running and gunning, and we're just the facts, and we don't take the time to sit there and have a kind of a human personal connection. So
sure, and also, and this goes into the side of, like, when you first are sitting with lawyers, or a lawyer comes to visit you and you're sitting in jail, it's always a surprise. I actually, with the exception of you visiting me, every time a lawyer showed up, I had no idea they were coming. So when they were coming, I would get called out, I would go sit there, and then I'm like just lost. And I'm like, I don't even know what to ask you right now. So then 15 minutes later, we're done. And I don't think it's the lawyer's fault by any means. I do believe that lawyers have a lot of clients, have a lot going on, but a better informed client is. Yeah. Well,
but I do think it is the lawyer's fault, from the sense that we don't have the empathy about what it's like to be sitting there lost and needing information and hopeless and scared. And a little bit of info sometimes could go a long way, or a little bit of human kindness can sometimes go a long way, or a little bit of empathy and understanding.
This call is from a federal prison.
So I think that's really a takeaway for the lawyers that are listening. You don't have to spend 6 hours in there, but you could spend 6 minutes just saying a few things. And by the way, can I call someone in your family? Do you need somebody to help? Let them know what's going on.
Well, even bigger than that is just providing the client with a list of potential resources. A lawyer walks in and the client is sitting there lost, the family is lost, and just saying, hey, there's a book out there. This book is something that will teach you all the stuff I'm not going to have time to teach you, and it gives us, the building blocks to keep working together. That kind of thing shows the client that you actually care, that they have knowledge, and then they feel good, because now all of a sudden they're getting information that they can concentrate their time on, because there's only one thing you've got while you're sitting in pretrial, and that's time. And it's a commodity in excess. And if you give them something to read, they will read it for the most part. So absolutely. I do believe that's a big thing. And it also goes to showing the client that you're not hiding anything. It's because that's one feeling. And when I was researching the book, by talking to fellow inmates, which I've spoken to many, that's the biggest complaint, is that they always felt their lawyer was hiding something from them. The ones who didn't like their lawyers. The guys who liked their lawyers, they didn't feel that way. But but that was the big difference, is the lawyer who spent the time communicating and trying to share and impart knowledge are the ones that nobody felt like were hiding anything. I'll tell you, I felt, the day I pled guilty, I felt like so much stuff was being hidden from me that I was petrified. And that's how we ended up with Alan Ellis and you and Vincent Ward, and that's how my case kind of brought in a good legal team. But it was years after I had started, so a lot of mistakes were made from that.
Well, I will say, and I do want to dig into why you're 5.5 years in pretrial, because I think a lot of people are astounded by that number. But I will just say, did we get cut off? Are you still there?
No, I'm here.
Oh, good. Okay, good. We probably will be soon. But the idea about, if you have a lawyer that doesn't want you to be armed with the knowledge, isn't interested in, having this book in your hands or something, that's a red flag, because there are some lawyers who basically take the tact of, you don't really need to know all this stuff. That's why you have me. I'm the one that's making these decisions for you. If you don't trust me to make the right decision, then screw you. And not a real good client relations tactic, but it is a thing. It is a thing. And,
it
don't
is.
ever be, even if you don't have the book in your hand, which I hope everyone will, but never be afraid to ask your lawyer, important questions about your case, or more importantly, just say, I don't get it. Explain this to me, and explain it to me like I'm, a 6-year-old, because I need to understand this is important stuff. And if they're not willing to do that, then you got a problem.
Right. And this is a big thing that I talk about in the book, is when you're looking for a lawyer, you've got to realize that the gears of justice are grinding slow. You have time. Do not just rush and go and drop $50,000 on somebody. Vet them.
Yeah.
Talk to them.
Go
with that's the 1-minute warning. So go with your gut. I was just talking to a friend of mine last night who he met an attorney, and he felt this guy was incredible. He was young, he was vivacious, knew what was going on, talked to him about real detailed stuff, but his family pushed him to go with the quote-unquote more experienced lawyer, whose experience was almost solely in state court. And when it all came said and done, he was like, I should have gone with this other guy. And, he was like, I didn't, and this inmate, he has substantial money. So, for him, it was like, he was like the cheaper lawyer who was newer and vivacious was the one I should have gone with. That's what I feel. And he didn't go with his gut, and he's beating himself up for the next 16.5 years with that.
Yep. Well, so that is going to be a topic that I want to go into in really good detail.
This call is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect at this time.
Yeah, so Bilal and I were talking, and we got cut off because 15-minute increments, and it really gets me thinking just to start back on this with you. But that's life, right? Your lifeline to family, friends, the outside world is a telephone, and you get 15 minutes. Is that how it works?
15 minutes for each call, and then after a call is over, if it hangs up after 10 seconds or the whole 15 minutes, you have to wait an hour to make another call.
Another
this
call
to
the
is
same.
From a federal prison.
And you're limited to 360 months. 300 minutes is the limit. Although right now they've been giving more, and there's some First Step Act credit incentive that's supposed to be given where you get free phone calls. But yeah, that's it. And there's my housing unit, which has over 300 people in it. We have 8 phones.
8 phones for over 300 people.
Yeah. Yes. And,
oh man. Yeah, these are the things that people don't think about. Like, there are these little things that make life hard every day, and that's one of them.
Well, actually, going back to us talking about the vetting the lawyer. And, that 15-minute phone call is what people get when they call their families, or they are trying to figure out if their lawyer is coming to see them, or while you're sitting in jail and that's all you've got 15 minutes. And you have to try and get it all out, like, hey, can you call the lawyer and do this and do that and do whatever? Because your only other option is snail mail. And, which arguably is a lot more protected from disclosure, but if you really want to talk to your lawyer, it's very difficult.
Well, I'm glad you got me back on track, because that's where we left off. And, you had mentioned that when you were in pretrial, you went through 7 lawyers, and, people will say, oh, he's just difficult, firing his lawyer, wants to cause delay, wants to play games. No. Getting the right lawyer in your case is the most important thing, first and foremost, because, without that, that they're the ones that are going to help you make the most important decisions of your life, whether to plead guilty, whether to go to trial, all of it. And if you don't have the right lawyer, you're not going to make the right decision. So there's so many great things in this big book. Part 4 it's about 200 pages in, but it's a whole section on finding the right lawyer. So tell me just generally, what was your journey to, and full disclosure, I'm in the book, so, I'm not, it's very sweet.
Well, but if we're going to get to the full disclosure, we have to say it right. You never asked to be in the book. You didn't even know you were in the book until I put you in the book. So.
Well, and I appreciate it.
So, and everything I said in there was absolutely true.
Well, you're sweet. And I'm starting to get a big head, because I just did a podcast with Dr. Kelly Richmond Pope, and she wrote this really cool book about fraud called Fool Me Once, and I was in that book too. So this is the second book in a year that I've been in, and I'm starting to feel like, I don't know, I'm just too cool for school. Anyway, enough about me. I want to know about you, and I want to talk for the time that we have today about advice we can give people about how to vet a lawyer. Now, the big problem here is if you can't afford to hire your own lawyer, you're going to get a public defender assigned to you, and I know people feel strongly about that, but I say there are many amazing, incredible public defenders. I know, because I was one of them way back in the day, but I also know that they're very busy and they're not great communicators, and
well, there is something to say about the public defender's office. And even CJA panel attorneys to some degree. The fact remains that you have time, and you are going to be assigned a lawyer no matter what. You walk in and you see the magistrate's going to say, well, give him a lawyer. There's going to be no question about it. Nobody's going to ask anything. And so you'll at least be protected in the meantime while you are trying to find a lawyer if you can afford one.
Yeah.
And, and you may come to find out that the public defender is a better choice. In many respects, I regret not using a public defender. When you know you're going to end up in prison, you know it's going to end in a guilty plea, the public defender might be in the better position to negotiate with the prosecutors because they work together so much. One thing I found about public defenders is they have significantly more experience in federal courtrooms.
Yeah.
I mean, other than the rarities like you or Alan Ellis, who specifically specialize in federal sentencing stuff, that's few and far between. And so I will say that, and doing research because I do help inmates with ineffective counsel claims, that I am more leery of going against a public defender because usually their stuff is good. They don't communicate, that is true, but it's probably because they're busy.
Yeah.
And the other caseloads.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind in the federal system is the federal public defenders are essentially members of the largest law firm in the world.
This call is from a federal prison.
They're all connected, which means they share information, they share resources, they share motions, they help. It's like having anything at your fingertip in this network, in this at your disposal. So if you're vetting a lawyer, we could talk about there's a million great questions to ask, but it's like, I'd like to know, how are you connected? Are you a member of NACDL? Because they have a great listserv where everybody can share information and ask questions and things like, what is your network? Because a lawyer is not supposed to know every goddamn thing about everything in a case. We don't know what we don't know, and the most important thing is that we don't have we have the ego put us ego aside.
Well, you're making an incredible point about vetting a lawyer right there. Lawyers cannot possibly know everything. I mean, the criminal law is hundreds of thousands of pages, and the fact remains that if you're sitting in front of a lawyer, and that lawyer is nonchalant about the amount of work it takes on each individual case, that's probably not the right guy, because the law changes. I mean, just before we started talking today, we were specifically talking about a significant change in the law, and it's
which I did not know about, by the way.
Right, and it's something that is surprising a lot of people. But with a lot of the lawyers who are just looking to get retained, they'll say things like, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, yeah, I know what you're facing. You'll get probation." Well, wait, did you look that up? Did you, And, it's one thing I've learned over the years is that since the law is written, it can be shown to you. So if a lawyer makes a claim to you, can he back it up by showing you where it says that? My first lawyer actually told me that I would get a safety valve and get under a mandatory minimum, and my offense did not allow for that because it was not a drug offense. And he kept insisting that I could get it, and it's like, well, the law is very clear that you have to have a drug offense to get a safety valve. So I don't know where he was making this up from.
Yeah.
So that's the kind that gut, your gut feeling is also a major component when you're talking to a lawyer. If you get, of course, there's our 1 minute warning.
Boy, that went fast.
Right.
I wish we didn't have the stupid 15-minute rule.
This call is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect at this time.
All right. So we were talking about, we're back. We were talking about how there are some good public defenders out there. And I know we've been talking federal, but it's true for the state too, although state is more burdened down with higher caseloads and lower resources. But there are some credible lawyers. I know that to be true too, because I worked in Maricopa County for several years where I started my career. But let's go back to private lawyers, because you went through a lot of them before you found the ones that were good for you. So where do you think things went south, or what would you have done? Let's ask you this way: what would you have done differently to get to the good stuff on the front end rather than having to go through 7?
Well, so the first thing would have been, because what ended up happening is my first lawyer was actually hired by my parents blindly. The first time I was able to speak to them and talk to them was 3 days after my arrest, and they came and they said, "We already hired a lawyer." So, when you're in that situation, what ends up happening, at least in what I felt, was, well, now my parents already paid all this money to somebody, so you feel stuck.
Yeah.
With that, and now, don't get me wrong, I actually knew who the lawyer was. He had represented someone I knew before in a state issue, and all in all, he was certainly a very boisterous attorney, but it felt like he wasn't paying too much attention to my case, so that's why I ended up leaving.
And let's focus on the word boisterous, because I think it hints to, they're big talkers, and maybe they wear a nice suit and they brag about their, exploits, and they have a fancy office and stuff. I like tequila. I drink tequila, and I'm one of the things I like to say, our lawyers are like tequila. In other words, most people think the bit more expensive, prettier bottle, the higher up on the shelf that bottle sits.
Right.
The more
but you walk into Mexico, and if you're paying that, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. And the best tequila, the best beautiful, most beautiful tasting tequila is in a very simple bottle, and it doesn't cost nearly as much as the stuff on the top shelf. And I find that that's same with lawyers. If they're facing on a bus or they have really fancy offices and fancy seats, that doesn't make them great. They may be great, but that's not what makes them great.
Right.
But
back to what happened, what would have been nice is if my parents said, "We believe we found a lawyer, but money isn't going to change hands until this guy meets with you, and you have a chance to say yes or no." But when this all happens, it feels like a floodgate opened, and that the dam is breaking, and that you have to do stuff right away, and that is the biggest misconception that I think every criminal defendant and their family goes through. Nothing has to happen that fast. You don't need a lawyer within 10 seconds. It's you can take your time to find one. As far as protecting you in court, if you're going to have a court date, which I was doing this for 5.5 years. On day one, I thought it was all going to be over in a week. But over time, I began learning that how slow it really does happen. And I know I'm way beyond the average. The average, I believe, is about 18 to 20 months from beginning to end.
Yeah.
But that says that you have a lot of time before you need to really buckle down to make that decision. So it'd be nice to have a few people show up, or when your family comes and says, "Hey, I found a lawyer," it would behoove the client, their loved one, to say, "Hey, look, if you already paid the money or whatever, see what you can do about getting it back until I have a chance to talk to him."
Yeah.
One thing that I think is it can go either way, and in my book I do talk about it either way, is the flat fee arrangement. The ethical lawyers who do the flat fee thing, you're not going to get messed over by them, but there are guys who say it's non-refundable, and you didn't want me to come down, well, it sucks. Wait, what? So you don't want that to happen either. I mean, we're talking about the potential for a down payment of a house here, and in some cases the entire cost of a house. So,
and by the way, I see this time and time again, which is they get the fee and they don't do hardly anything in the case, and once the fee is in your pocket, you don't have a huge incentive to work like the devil and file those extra motions and spend that extra time, because the more hours you put into the case, the lower your hourly rate, the average hourly rate comes out to be. And by the way, if they're charging you a low flat rate, you should be worried about that too. Getting a deep discount, to me, says either they don't comprehend the complexity of the case and the hours they're really going to need to spend, and they won't spend them once they figure it out.
Well, and if you're seriously talking to yourself about, I need the cheapest price possible, at that point, go to the public defense.
Yeah.
Because you're at least going to get somebody who's specializing in it, and while they may be overburdened with huge caseloads, they do have a team with them. They do research. They do those things.
Maybe if you got a little money to spend, or the family does, use it to kind of get some support if you think the public defender needs them. Which
actually,
they don't always need them.
That raises an interesting story. When I was in pretrial, it was a state inmate who was with me, and he had asked, "What should I do? I have $5,000 and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Hey, get a private investigator." This guy had a very serious trial issue, but he needed someone to beat feet and get out there and look it all up. And once this investigator found everything out, dropped it off with the public defender, they won. They won on a motion to dismiss, actually.
Yeah. And ideally, the public defender has investigators there, but they don't always, or they're too busy. So
it depends on their budget. I mean, there's so many factors that just play into it. But with all that said, there are options. You don't need to move so fast. You don't need, it's in the very beginning of my book, I actually say, take up knitting. You've got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Well,
let's do lightning round. Okay, so you have great stuff in your book about vetting. So, hiring a lawyer is like basically hiring an employee. You do a job interview and you're in charge. The lawyer never makes you feel like you're in charge, because we're all full of ourselves and we want control. But the truth is, if you're going to be dropping a down payment on a house for a lawyer, you're in charge. And you get to ask that lawyer any question you want. So let's do lightning round, back and forth. What are some questions that you would ask a lawyer if you were vetting them for the first time?
Well, so I guess it depends if I'm talking to a lawyer who claims they were a prosecutor or not. But let's just start with somebody who's not a prosecutor. I'm concerned with how many active cases they're handling. Because there is such a, the public defender is overburdened. We know that. So we know there is a point at which there is way too much.
Yeah.
And if a private lawyer who you're going to pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to or more has 50 cases, well, obviously he can't take 50 cases to trial. It's just not going to happen. Right? And how much time can he honestly spend on it during that? So how many active cases that lawyer is handling is a big indicator to me if they know how to manage their own practice to the point where they can concentrate on my case.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna go. What's your caseload? Good question.
This call is from a federal prison.
Yes, we know all about it. Okay. So when does mitigation start? When do we start talking about my life and all of this? That's what I would ask a lawyer. Because if they say, that's way down the road, that's a red flag. Mitigation should start at the beginning.
Yeah, and that was a big mistake in my case too, about not talking about the mitigation aspects of it, especially knowing so early on that it was going to be a sentencing case.
Yes, and by the way, the prosecutor is the first person to sentence you.
Right.
Because they're the ones that have all the discretion about what kind of a plea agreement to offer you. And so if you're just talking about, well, your case may not be that strong, you may not win at trial, and you're not talking about this is the human being that is in your fate and future is in your hands, and this is why he's worthy of some consideration. If you're not doing that along with the other stuff, you've missed half of the whole deal. That's my opinion.
Right. Well, and even, to mention on mitigation, sometimes even in a proof trial, mitigation issues do come up where it may be something important that the lawyer needs to have in his toolbox from the beginning. Why wait until the end to get important information?
Sure. Because someone's saying you did something and you're saying you didn't do it, well, wouldn't it be important for the jury to know what your life is and what your character is and all that to show how incongruous it is with the crazy allegation that's being leveled against you? Something like that is an example, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, next. So I got one. When does mitigation start? What? Give me another one.
So the next one is, how many federal trials? How many federal cases have you been on? We're talking. I mean, my book talks almost entirely about the federal system. And when you're dealing with a federal case, a lot of lawyers may be great in state court. What I have found is many of them assume that federal court uses the same rules of procedure, the same way to do everything, and it is so far from the truth.
Yeah, it's another planet in every respect.
It is.
Especially when it comes to the guidelines, which it takes
unless you're in the state of Washington, the guideline system is unique to the federal system. It's not something that you're going to run into everywhere. Like in the state of New Mexico, where I'm from, it's a pretty set sentencing scheme. Class 4 felony, 18 months. Well, that's not happening with the guidelines. So so knowing that they have specific experience that they can talk about from the federal system will show you that this person knows the federal system. Not that they can point to one thing or another, that they have experience. That's what you want in a lawyer. You want that lawyer to be able to stand up there and be able to, on the fly, know what the rule is. Otherwise, you could just do it yourself. So, all right, next question.
We talked about former prosecutors. We know a lot of prosecutors end up as defense lawyers. What kind of questions would you want to ask? Because usually they're going to tout that as a credential. I was a prosecutor, so I know the system from the inside. What would you do
worse
with
than
that?
touting it as a credential is, I believe, the biggest red flag a prosecutor could give, and this is outside of a question, is when they imply that their status as a prosecutor will get you something. It will not. It does nothing. There are new powers that be in the prosecutor's office. There are 15 different people who are in charge who are going to make their own decisions. And it doesn't matter how much this guy has ever worked in there. He could have been the head U.S. attorney for the whole district at one point in his life. It doesn't mean anything. And and that's what you have to start that interview with when they say I was a prosecutor. Okay, well, I don't care. And
if anything, I've found a lot of times, because they're the former colleagues, they're less inclined to get scrappy with them. They want to go along to get along a lot of the time. Not all.
Yeah, that was the 1 minute warning again. But you do have that, and it's. But as far as a question to ask them, why did you switch? And that was a question you actually proposed to me when I was authoring the book. You said that's a good question to ask them. Why did you switch? Is it because you were voted out, or a new president came in and fired you, or is it because you really were like, this is a screwed up world and I can't continue doing this? Ethically, whatever.
Or along the same lines, what are the things you look back at that time that you really would have done differently, or that you regret as a prosecutor?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's really important.
So, keeping with the lightning round, I have one more for you, and it's really about motion practice. I'm curious to know, because it takes a lot of time and effort and resources to file really substantive motions, so I would ask them about motions. In particular, generally, what's your strategy with motion filing? Because some lawyers say, well, we don't want to file a lot of motions, make the prosecutor work, and maybe they'll be mad and they won't give us a good plea and blah, blah, blah. And, I think every case is different, but a lot of times filing motions is what gets you a better result.
Yeah, well,
right?
Interestingly, Mark Regeros, he in the book he wrote, he talks about this very thing, that the one thing clients want is to see someone fight something. Anything. Like, put it in something, If a lawyer doesn't like doing substantive motions, the client's got nothing to hang on to.
Yeah. And
there's got to be some fight somewhere.
Right.
Criminal defense is commonly a loser, especially in the federal system, but that doesn't mean there isn't a fight.
And the thing about it is like, it's not necessarily just about filing motions for the sake of filing. Obviously they can't be frivolous motions. That's not ethical. But even if it's, you're going to lose, a lot of lawyers say, why would I bother? Well, you bother, A, because it makes the other side work, B, because what you just said, C, because it's an opportunity to educate the court and the prosecution about what your story is and what your defense is. These are all opportunities to tell your story.
Yes, and it's another opportunity is even in the plea negotiation stage. If the prosecution has nothing to be afraid of, what is their incentive to negotiate?
Yeah, right.
If they're not worried they're going to lose, that's like going to buy a car and being like, well, it's a take it or leave it deal. Well, okay, I guess I have to pay what you want it, if I want this car. And, in criminal defense, it does seem like one of the things that bothers most clients is the negotiation process, because most people think of negotiation as a business transaction. You got to give up something and get something, but there needs to be a reason in the middle of the table why anybody's going to sit there.
Yeah.
Nobody settles a lawsuit for any reason unless they're afraid they're going to lose.
Yes. Or if they're afraid they're going to be worked to death and be taken away from other things, and they just don't think this case is important enough to fight it. Sometimes I don't even file the motions. I just draft them.
This call is from a federal prison.
Right, you just share them with the prosecution that, the intention to file, and then they see it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You want to litigate this stack, or should we talk about a plea? Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Well, and actually, case in point, Doug, you did that in my own case. We filed a motion. The prosecution knew that it was going to be a big deal, and they were very petrified of it, and they came with a deal very rapidly. And it's in another case, but that is something that a lawyer should be able to answer confidently. You don't want somebody to say, "Well, I'm taking all your money," which actually brings to another thing that I didn't bring up before, but is important. That sometimes, and a lot of people don't know this, you can hire a lawyer outside your jurisdiction, and if you're going to pay someone $50,000. And you're afraid that this person is going to not argue because he's friends with the prosecutors, or he doesn't want to upset his own friends. He doesn't, the guy who comes from out of town may be more likely to pick those fights because he doesn't know any of these people and has no care in the world for them. So that is something to think about when you're talking to anybody.
A lawyer can get admitted what's called pro hoc vice, which is basically, just a one-time deal for whatever jurisdiction they're in. Most of the time, it's a pretty easy process. A lot of times you need a local lawyer on the case to partner up with. But then you got a good cop, bad cop situation because you got the friendly local person and the outside agitator, as Norman Fell would say in The Graduate. You're not one of those outside agitators, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Last thing on motions, and then I want to get back to a subset of this, but I'd be interested to just say, what is the most creative motion you've ever filed in a case, or what is the most successful? Like, what is the motion you're most proud of that just won the day and turn the tide in your case? And tell me about it. It's going to give you a sense of whether they're BS. The devil's in the details, right? So.
Right.
If you think a lawyer's BSing, you just drill down and ask for specifics.
Well, and one little trick to find out if the lawyer sitting in front of you is willing to file substantive motions is to have someone who can jump online and just find any case opinions involving that lawyer from a judge. And if they're lengthy, it probably was a very lengthy motion that was filed.
Yeah.
It's judges because judges also have to be afraid of appeals, so they're going to start writing lengthy opinions. And if they write lengthy opinions against this lawyer, that is a clue that the lawyer is somebody who's willing to file stuff.
That is such an amazing, incredible point and idea, and it wasn't even in my brain. But yeah, I mean, most of the stuff is going to be public record. Some of it's under seal, but most of it not. And to forget motions now, look at sentencing memos. What has a lawyer?
So the sentencing memo thing is a little harder. If you're in jail, if you're in a federal detention center, one thing you have access to is the LexisNexis Law Library that the Bureau of Prisons provides, which is for the federal system. And you can look up every district, and all you have to do is type in the lawyer's name, and you will start finding anything that lawyer was involved in.
Yeah. So this is great. And most states have searchable databases now too. And by the way, our friend, my colleague Mark Allenbaugh, this is really his wheelhouse at sentencingstats.com because he has access to that and many, many databases and can do deep dives. But the point is, you don't need to hire anybody. You could probably just do a search online. And I want to know, are you routinely filing sentencing memos? Because I've had lawyers that go, "Oh, we don't do sentencing memos here."
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's a little curious. But
it's actually interesting you bring that up because in my book, I specifically bring up the sentencing memo as something that even if you have a locked-in plea, it needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of other things that could go on, and if anything, to those lawyers who are listening, it'll show your client that you paid attention. That you didn't just show up and just said, "Oh yeah, who cares?"
Mm-hmm.
And
You're
everybody
here to tell
thinks
their story.
Exactly.
You're here to make their voice heard. You're here to make sure they're seen, and that they're not a number, that they're not shuffled through. And memos are, sentencing memos are basically just a variation of motion practice. So this is a good fit. But I want to know: A, are you filing? B, what are you filing? Is it boilerplate? Or C, do you really see individualized attention, powerful storytelling, use of pictures, all the things that make your lawyer stand out from the run-of-the-mill lawyer who's just going through the motions?
Right.
No pun intended, I guess.
Right. And one of the clues, just to finish this point, one of the clues if they're using boilerplate is if it feels like they're trying to just educate the judge or they're trying to advocate a position. If they're just educating, it's boilerplate. It's simple. I did this in law school. That's it. But if they're advocating,
this call is from a federal prison.
If they are advocating your case or whatever case you're reading, that means they're a true advocate. That it's not about making the judge's life substantially easier. It's making sure the client's position is pressed forward.
Right, because a lot of these are cut and paste, and if you look at a motion and it starts talking about in federal court, Booker, the guidelines are advisory, the court has discretion, that the lawyer just cut and pasted from a routine motion, and he's telling the judge everything the judge already knows. It's a waste. You'd be surprised. You probably wouldn't be surprised, Bilal, but you'd be.
Well, actually, what's really interesting about it is that same boilerplate is used by jailhouse lawyers who have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? This is all you got?
That should speak volumes if the lawyers are. But yeah, I mean, I've seen so many sentencing memos that just waste the first 2, 3, 4, 5 pages with boilerplate BS, and by that time the audience is tuned out. So I know we have limited time, and I want to talk. Just keep going with this because in your book, Surviving Pretrial, the ultimate survival guide to being busted and prosecuted by the feds, you keep going with this how to find a lawyer thing and talk about things you don't want to hear. Tell me about that.
Well, so, when you a lot of guys end up in this first meeting with a lawyer and they're petrified. They're not used to being the employer. They're not used to being that guy putting somebody on the spot. So what you got is what they're telling you. And a lot of lawyers will volunteer the absolute worst information that should tell you to run at top speed away from these guys. For instance, when the guy says, hey, man, I play golf with the judge. I go to the Christmas parties with the prosecutors.
Right.
Who cares?
I have some special in.
Yeah, that special
code.
in. Right. And he plays golf with the judge. Well, I'm pretty sure the judge isn't going to throw away that Senate confirmation that he went through to become a judge just for golf. Okay?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So like that is the quintessential what you don't want to hear. But another thing you don't want to hear, and it happens so often, is we are going to waive your rights. Oh, your speedy trial rights. Don't worry about that. Oh, just wait for the indictment. Oh, just, I want to get a plea. And, if you keep doing that kind of stuff, your lawyer's going to start filing motions to get extensions, and you're just going to sit and rot, wonder what's going on. And the prosecution is let go from having to do anything.
Right.
That's it. Just even if you intend on pleading guilty, maintaining your right to a speedy trial, which is waived if you do not speak it into the record.
Yeah, right.
And all you have to say is, I want the speedy trial stuff. That's it.
Yeah.
I want it. And guess what? Now the prosecutor's like, oh, Jesus.
Well,
but
yeah, and I will say, just in defense of the lawyer, a lot of times we need that time to really do a thorough workup of a case. So you should just make sure if this lawyer's wants you to waive your speedy trial rights, that they're giving you a really good explanation for why that is, and then that they're following through with it,
Right. Like if you have to do a major investigation, you're hiring private investigators, there needs to be like feet on the ground figuring things out. But that also doesn't mean that the lawyer can't press the speedy trial and then later waive it.
Right.
And say, I need more time and I have spoken to my client, he's with this. That's very different than just waiving it from the gate. My speedy trial rights were waived at a detention hearing.
Wow.
Because it was, we're going to negotiate a pre-indictment plea for you. So waive the indictment for another 70 days, yada, yada, yada. You don't want an indictment. And when I heard that, I'm like, oh, my God, I don't want an indictment. Turns out an indictment is my constitutional right, so I don't know why I'd be afraid of it.
Yeah.
And, it's that kind of stuff right there. It's like the prosecutor was bending us over, and we're saying, yeah, okay, sure, do it.
Right.
Like, and so you never want to hear that. Another thing you don't want to hear is there's our 1 minute. You never want to hear the guarantee. Nothing in law is guaranteed. Nothing.
Oh, right. If they're if they promise you something other than I will work as hard as I can and do the very best of my ability, if they promise you anything other than that, run screaming. Yeah, run.
Yeah. I guarantee you're going to win this motion. I guarantee that. No, you have no idea.
Yeah.
On the flip side of it, I've even seen lawyers who say, we're going to lose this motion, and then they won. So, it could go either way.
Yeah. Well, that was the end of my time with Bilal Khan. You can see that we were so ruthlessly and mercilessly cut short in the middle of our conversation. Of course, that happened 4 times. We cobbled together 4 different calls to make this 45-plus minute podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. But more importantly, I hope that you consider going to Amazon.com. Link will be in the show notes to pick up a copy of Mr. Khan's really, really useful pretrial primer here. It's called Surviving Pretrial, the Ultimate Survival Guide to Being Busted and Prosecuted by the Feds. So this is really special. There have been other books on the topic, but this one is written by not only someone who's currently incarcerated in a federal facility, but I have known this gentleman for years upon years. He was one of the first people that I did a sentencing video for when I went out on my own after I left the federal public defender office. So we're talking back in now 2014, I think. And, I've been following him and his progress in custody this whole time. I mean, we go way back, and I just got to say, this is a super smart, really articulate, a really hardworking, really well-intentioned, amazing person who just so happens to be incarcerated in a federal prison. But remember, we don't define people by their worst mistakes in life. We define them by the totality of their life's work. And the fact that he is kind of making good on he's doing so much positive work in there, not just on himself, but for other inmates. And a lot of people would shut down and say, I'm in prison and I'm just going to do that and not really do much of anything else while they're in custody. It takes a lot of dedication, a lot of discipline, a lot of smarts to be able to create a work like this. And I know that it's already circulating around not just federal, but also state facilities. And there's really, really useful information in here for anybody who is facing charges, might be facing charges, family members who want to try to get help for their loved ones who are facing charges, and lawyers too. There's a lot of good information in there, and it's really, really important that we lawyers be able to see the world through the eyes of our clients. The fear that they're experiencing, the anxiety that they're experiencing, the uncertainty that they're experiencing, and we don't think about that because we're just kind of plowing ahead, doing our lawyer thing, and not realizing that the client needs more from us. And there's so much in this book that gives us great information about what that more is and how we can give it. So I really do implore you to check it out, Surviving Pretrial. If you go to the show note links, www.setforsentencing.com, scroll down to this episode. It is episode 62. You'll get a link right there in the show notes to Amazon, and you can pick it up there. So anyway, I'm going to have Mr. Khan back because it's a 500-page book, and there's a heck of a lot of ground to cover. We're not going to cover all of it, but I hope that we're going to be having more 15-minute incremental conversations in the future. And I guess the even greater hope is that, in the not-too-distant future, we won't be having these discussions from inside of a BOP facility, that Mr. Khan will be free. So that's really the hope. Anyway, I'm so grateful that you joined us for this episode of Set for Sentencing. Keep tuning in. Check us out. Subscribe on YouTube. Like us on the iTunes and all that good stuff. And we'll talk with you soon. Thanks. That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.